He didn't walk to the defendant's stand, he strolled to it. Hands loose at his sides, jaw working like he was finishing a thought, eyes sweeping the gallery the way you survey a room you've already decided belongs to you. The bailiff had to repeat his name twice before he acknowledged it, and when he finally positioned himself in front of the microphone, he adjusted it, downward toward himself, with the unhurried authority of a man taking the stage at his own event. Judge Frank Caprio watched all of this from the bench without expression. In 30-plus years, he had developed the particular skill of letting people show him exactly who they were before he said a single word. Brandon McGough was showing him a great deal, and in approximately 20 minutes, every single thing Brandon McGough had just demonstrated would be used against him with surgical, devastating precision. Brandon McGough was 31 years old, and he arrived in Courtroom 3 the way a weather system arrives, preceded by reputation, felt before fully visible. He had been arrested 48 hours earlier on charges of operating an unregistered vehicle, providing false identification to a law enforcement officer, and resisting a civil citation. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off at the shoulders, work boots unlaced at the top, and a lanyard around his neck from which hung a laminated card that read in bold capital letters, "Sovereign National, not subject to statutory jurisdiction." He had made the card himself. He had, in fact, brought 2 extras, which he placed on the railing in front of him like business cards at a networking event. The bailiff looked at them, the clerk looked at them, Judge Caprio looked at Brandon McGough and said in the warmest possible voice, "Good morning, can you state your name for the record?" Brandon McGough smiled like he'd been waiting for exactly this. Drop a comment right now if you already know where this is going, because what Judge Caprio was about to do to this man's entire worldview was quieter, more precise, and more permanent than anything Brandon McGough had prepared for. Subscribe before it's over. This story only gets bigger. "I am," Brandon said, drawing the words out with the cadence of someone who has memorized a script, "Brandon James, of the McGough family. A living, breathing man of flesh and blood. I am not the legal fiction Brandon McGough as registered with the corporate state of Rhode Island, and I do not consent to this court's jurisdiction over my person, my body, or my—" "Mr. McGough," Judge Caprio said, "Brandon James, of the—" "I heard you." The judge's voice had not changed in temperature by a single degree. "Do you have a place to live?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Brandon blinked. His script did not have this page. That's not relevant to—" "It's relevant to bail," Judge Caprio said simply. "Do you have a fixed address?" Brandon reset. He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel and produced a folded document, handwritten, dense with capitalized phrases, underlined passages, and references to the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, the Magna Carta, and what appeared to be a 1933 Senate hearing. He unfolded it with the reverence of someone presenting sacred text. "I have here an affidavit of sovereign status and a notice of non-consent to jurisdiction, which I am entering into the record as—" "You can give that to the clerk," Judge Caprio said. "Do you have a job?" That's when everything changed. Because Brandon McGough, whose entire performance had been constructed around the assumption that the judge would engage with his framework, would argue, would push back, would acknowledge the theory long enough for Brandon to perform inside it, suddenly had nothing to perform against. Judge Caprio was not debating him. Judge Caprio was doing a bail assessment, and the bail assessment did not care about the Magna Carta. Brandon's composure cracked at the surface, just slightly, like a glaze beginning to check. "I don't participate in the wage slavery system of the corporate." "So that's a no on the job," the clerk typed. "No fixed address, no verifiable employment." Judge Caprio made a note. "Can anyone in the courtroom today confirm your ties to this community?" Brandon looked at the gallery. He had brought one person, a man in the 4th row in a similar flannel, holding what appeared to be a notebook, who gave Brandon an encouraging nod. Brandon gestured to him. "My associate, is your associate a family member?" "He's a fellow national, so no family here." Another note. Judge Caprio set down his pen and looked at Brandon McGough with the complete, undeflected attention that is, in this courtroom, the signal that the most important part is arriving. "Mr. McGough, I want to explain something to you, and I want you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to say is not an argument. It's the law, and it applies to you, whether you've consented to it or not. The courtroom went silent, not the quiet of waiting, the quiet of recognition, the gallery collectively understanding that the real hearing had just begun. You have come into this court today with laminated cards and handwritten notices and a theory about sovereignty that I have seen presented in various forms over many years. I understand the appeal of it. I understand that it offers people a sense of power in moments when they feel powerless, a framework for refusing systems that have sometimes failed them. I don't dismiss the frustration that drives people to it. His voice remained level, unhurried, without contempt. But here is what the theory has never been able to answer, in any court, in any jurisdiction, in any form it has ever taken. The man who was stopped driving an unregistered vehicle on a public road in the state of Rhode Island was using roads maintained by tax revenue, protected by officers employed by the state, participating in infrastructure that exists because of the very legal system he is now telling me does not apply to him. He paused, and the pause had the weight of everything he had not yet said. You cannot use the system as a convenience and reject it as an inconvenience, Mr. McGough. That is not sovereignty. That is simply wanting rules that only apply to other people. Brandon McGough had stopped touching the laminated cards on the railing. His hands were at his sides. The man in the fourth row had stopped writing in his notebook. You have no verifiable address, no employment, no community ties, and a pending charge that includes providing false identification to a law enforcement officer, Judge Caprio continued. By every standard metric used to assess flight risk, you are high. The documents you have submitted have no legal standing in this or any court, and the framework you are operating under has been rejected, unanimously and repeatedly, by every appellate body that has ever examined it. He set his hands flat on the bench. Bail is set at $15,000. Brandon's mouth opened. I don't consent. Your consent, Judge Caprio said, with the finality of a door closing on a room that no longer needed to be entered, is not a variable in this calculation. Brandon McGough was remanded. His laminated cards were collected with his personal effects. The handwritten affidavit was filed and formally noted as legally non-operative. The man in the fourth row left without his notebook page being useful to anyone. What followed over the next 3 months was the particular grinding reality that the sovereign citizen framework always eventually produces. Attorney fees Brandon couldn't cover because he had no income. A court-appointed public defender who explained, carefully and more than once, that the legal theories Brandon had been studying online did not function as advertised, and a series of continued hearings in which the charges were addressed one by one according to the actual law of the actual state of Rhode Island, which had not ceased to exist during Brandon's period of non-consent to it. He pled guilty on the false identification charge in month 4. The others were resolved through negotiation. He was assigned community service hours and a period of supervised probation. He completed them. The laminated cards, as far as anyone knows, were never reordered. The road you drive on was built by the system you're rejecting. The court that heard you was staffed by people who showed up. The judge who looked at you and told you the truth without cruelty. He did it because he believed you were worth telling the truth to. That is not a fiction. That is what accountability looks like when it's done with humanity intact. Comment below and tell me, what would you have said when Brandon adjusted that microphone on the way in? Share this with someone who needs to understand the difference between freedom and refusal. Subscribe, because this channel is for every courtroom moment where the truth arrived quietly, said what needed to be said, and left the room changed.